Whoa. What the? Hello? Is this too loud? Does it sound too bad? What is happening? Let me verify real quick. Too bad. What is happening? Let me verify real quick. Too bad. Okay. Hmm. Well, how does it sound now? Is it still kind of like too close? How does it sound now? Is it still kind of like too close? Doesn't look bad. I don't know. Let me try turning it down. Is that any better? Seems okay. Is that any better? Seems okay. Is that any better? Seems no. Give me one sec. Okay. So I changed the USB port and that kind of helped once. So let's see. Okay. Can I talk again so I can hear myself? Okay. Can I talk again so I can hear myself? Not bad. Turn it back up. Where's my phone? Okay. Alex, what's up? I saw your chat. I apologize. Like a lot of things just came up suddenly. How's Paris so far? Well, I don't live there. I got back from Paris. Saturday. It was very, very fun. Very, very, very fun. It's a great time. Okay. Get that out of the way. Okay. So, welcome everybody to modding from the new apartment. Oh, okay. So yeah, modding from the new apartment. Oh, okay. So yeah, modding from the new apartment. Good. I like the way that sounds. Something about that port. It's just weird, but okay. So this area, I'm very satisfied with this area. I'm okay with it. Actually, before I go on, there's something I want to check. What? Oh my gosh, hurry up. Any time now. Finally. Ow. Oh, where's the sword? I don't know why that's on the floor. Shouldn't be. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so those work as they should. I'm ready to fight. It'll be better with nav mesh on the ground, but... The werewolf's a little weird. But I think it's just because of the nav mesh. Cool, not bad. I would like a chandelier or something right there. All right, but that satisfies me. Okay. So like I said, that satisfies me. Oh yeah, we were listening. Like, I was gonna bring up this.
Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and before we get started on tonight's video, I'm going to let you know about tonight's author. Dr. Plague, or Erucius, has a book available now on Amazon. This is actually the 5th compilation of short stories that they have available on Amazon, and I'll have a link to all 5 of them in the description down below. If you guys love horror stories, or if you've loved any of the stories you've heard from Erucius before, I strongly suggest you check these out. You don't want to miss out on any of the really good ones I haven't had the chance to put in here yet. And speaking of stories from Erucius, on to tonight's story. I heard he was mute, and the clapping is how he communicates. I heard he's a ghost. The clapping is how he gets your attention. I heard you were both big old babies who would believe in anything. Daryl and Gary looked up incredulously at me as I grinned back at them from across the lunch table. Oh yeah? Well, he's been linked to the disappearance of like 4 kids now, so it sounds like a pretty good reason to be afraid of him, Daryl said, sounding mad. I just shrugged at him, popping a french fry in my mouth and savoring the salt. There's no proof that this clapping man is responsible for a candy bar going missing at Dell's, let alone Mickey Frazier getting snatched. The clapping man story was something that had been circulating for a while. 3 younger kids had gone missing first, all of them heading home from somewhere or another, and some of the witnesses had reported hearing a clapping sound before they had gone missing. One of them had even reported seeing a man-sized shape in the woods before hearing the clap. They didn't have any details about the guy, but they said that it looked like a person's shadow with long arms. Mickey had been the most recent disappearance, and the one that made the cops around Tiger the most nervous. The first 3 had been younger kids, elementary school kids, who hadn't looked like much, but Mickey had been a 17-year-old farm kid who was built like a linebacker. The story was that he was trying to find one of his dad's missing sheep around dusk. He had just never come back. The stories were that he was near a Kindle-covered bridge, and that the sheep had been found dead underneath it the next day. There were the usual rumors that Mickey had run off or left to be with a girl, left to be with a boy for all they knew. But those of us who had known Mickey kinda doubted it. Mickey was slow. I mean, not like special ed slow, but he was slower than average. He loved his family. He loved working on his parents' farm. And the thought that he would just run off when he couldn't come back with the sheep was laughable. Mickey liked football too, but if his dad had asked, he'd have given it up in a heartbeat. The cops knew this too, and that's why they were so sure that Mickey had been taken by someone, and that someone had to be big. The bell rang, and we kept our seats as the good little sheep dispersed around us. We'd leave when the monitor finally told us that we had to, and not a minute before. Gary still looked a little nervous as the cafeteria cleared out, but Daryl was pretty used to this. Daryl and me had been hellions since we were young. But it was a life that Gary was slowly getting used to. I'm not a bad kid. I mean, not really. I loved my mama, I respected my dad. I kept my truck well maintained, and I'm good to my girl when I have one. And that being said, I have no time for weakness or rules. The only rule I know is that the strong rule, and it's a rule that I learned from my dad. If I'm strong, and I am, I should be able to do what I want. If other kids don't understand that, well, that's their problem. Just like when I push them down and show them who's boss. Daryl, Gary, and me never really considered ourselves a gang or anything, but we pal around because we all believe that when you're strong, you're right. Mrs. Gladdy looked our way, and I grinned at her as I waved. Mrs. Gladdy's cute, and she ain't strong. She teaches home ec, and she drives a Spark. Nothing about that says strong. She'd come over before and tried to talk nice to us to get us back on the straight and narrow, but never did any good. Eventually, she stopped trying, and when she turned and called for Mr. Gersh, the shop teacher, we took our feet off the table and started heading to class. Now, Gersh was strong. An 8-year combat vet with scars to prove it. He was not to be messed with. We were halfway to class when the bell rang from the start of 5th period, and I looked at the boys and told them I thought maybe we should take the rest of the day off. I gotta get to math, Gary said. If I don't keep at least a C, they'll kick me off the football team. Same, Daryl said with a sigh. If I don't pass that history test today, my mom says I can't run the roads this weekend. Come on, man. Just come to class with us. The beers will still be there after school. I blew a big old raspberry at them and told them if they wanted to be pansies, then I'd go drink it all up before they got there. They begged me not to go, but I was done for the day. School had never really held any appeal for me. I already figured I'd drop out at the end of the year, go into hauling lumber like my uncle, or into farming like my dad. I was too dumb for the army, too lazy for college. But at least I figured it out a year before anyone else did. Have fun with math class then, I said, waving as I walked to the parking lot to get to my truck. The little Ford Ranger that Dad had given me wasn't much, but it was fine for now. I really wanted to get one of those big F-350s like my uncle had.
Oh,
I'd either
jeez.
have to save up a bunch of money or steal one to have something that nice.
Yeah, a bunch
The Ranger was
of
fine for
money.
now, and I slunk out of the lot in low gear before turning and flying up the road for home. The dirt roads of Tiger were like a second home to me. I put the schoolhouse behind me. I thought again about just leaving in one of them for parts unknown. What was there really here for me? Dead-end job, a nagging wife, squalling kids, and a mortgage I couldn't pay, bottle of beer after work with the boys, a loveless marriage that would hang like a shackle around my neck. Maybe a trip to Stragview if I wasn't careful, or a telephone pole in the night if I had one too many beers. I didn't like to think too much about the future then, preferring to live in the moment. And this particular moment was about to contain a 12-pack of beer. I pulled in behind the barn so that Dad wouldn't see me if he came home early. Dad was at the farmer's market till around 4 selling his wares, and I figured he wouldn't be the wiser of me cutting school. I walked off into the field of peanuts, this year's crop, and into the woods beyond. I'd been exploring the woods before I was potty trained, and the spot I knew of was about a mile back in an old tangle of trees. Daryl and me had found it when we were still small enough to squeeze between the roots of the snacky trees and make a clubhouse down there. And it now served as a spot for us to drink and smoke and bring girls for a little privacy. The forest was familiar, an old friend that protected me sometimes when Dad had a little too much to drink, and before I knew it, I could see the old grove of trees in the distance. Most of the forest was thick old oaks and some scraggly little pup trees, but the grove was different. It was old. It felt ancient somehow. And being there made me feel peaceful, like nothing could hurt me while I was there. I got to the snaky trees and took a seat on the comfy old roots that stuck above ground. Reaching into the gnarled old root system and pulling out the 12-pack of Budweiser, I cracked the first can and drank it quickly, smacking my lips as the crisp taste filled my stomach. This was the good life right here, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. I'd have to trade this kind of carefree time for adulthood soon enough, and the thought of saying goodbye to the snaky tree grove was a little sad. I opened a second one, drinking it slower this time, and the wind rustled the leaves around me. I felt a yawn creeping up my throat. Dad and me had been splitting wood before school today, and the early morning and the lukewarm beer was starting to make me groggy. As the second one disappeared and the third one popped open, I got comfy and watched the dragonflies and little forest animals frolic in the bow of the trees. I felt at ease, like I was floating, when the beer can slipped out of my hand and fell into the nest of roots. I was snoring before it dumped its delicious contents on the ground. When I woke up, it was dark. The sound of birds and squirrels had been replaced with insects and a scamper of bats. This didn't immediately put me off. I had been in the woods at night before. Daryl and me had camped out tons of times. I'd even slept rough a time or two if Mom and Dad were fighting. I pulled myself out of the tangle of roots and wobbled a little before getting my bearings. I wasn't drunk, not by a long shot, or hungover. I'd taken a long nap in the woods, and now it was time to get home and face the music. School would have called by now and told them I left early. Dad would be looking for me during evening chores, not found me. These things would have culminated in him having a drink as he waited for me, as I was likely in for a bad time. I walked out of the grove, watching my step as I went. And that was when I first heard it. A loud pop sound that made me freeze in place and listen like a spooked deer. I stopped for a count of 5, waiting for it to come again so I could identify it, but all I heard was the quiet sounds of the evening woods. I started walking again, but after 5 more steps, I heard the loud pop again. I thought that it might be a tree branch cracking at first, but now it sounded more like something familiar. It wasn't a natural sound, not like a branch breaking or rocks bumping as they fell. It was a sound I hadn't really heard out here before. A sound I was familiar with, but seemed alien out here. It sounded like someone bringing their hands together for a single hard clap. I kept walking towards the house, thinking I was hearing things, but the longer I went, the more I heard the clapping sound. It was infrequent. Always that one loud pop, and when I looked, there was nothing I could find that would have made it. The longer I walked, the more freaked out I got at the popping. I found myself looking for a man's shape in the woods, thinking about what the kids had told the cops. It was big, like someone's shadow, standing in the woods. Its arms were longer than usual, and they had heard a loud clapping sound before their friends had disappeared. I stopped again. It had been closer this time. It sounded like it was about 20 feet away, and the clap, it had silenced a bunch of the forest creatures that had been buzzing placidly. I wanted to run, but I made myself walk so I didn't trip in a hole or knock myself unconscious on a low-hanging branch. There was also the fact that these were my woods. I mean, nothing bad could happen to me in my woods. No one could hurt me. No one would dare to. Now it was closer. 10 feet or better. It was following me, and I was still a half mile from home. I wondered how far it would let me get before it snatched me. Would they find any evidence that I had been alive? Would they ever find anything? I quickened my pace. Holes be damned, I needed to go. I needed to get out of here. I needed to be behind my door with a lock thrown and the bolt pushed in. I'd hug my dad, I'd tell him I was sorry, I'd take whatever punishment came, but I needed to know that the monster or freak or whatever was outside and couldn't get me. I ducked a branch that I saw as a vague outline and I kept moving. The popping had stopped for now, but I knew that I wasn't safe. I had to get home. I had to get home. I turned my head in the direction of the sound. And there he was. He was man-shaped, that was for sure. He looked like a bulky man, his arms and legs just thick outlines in the murk. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. He didn't make a sound, but the longer I stayed still, the more I began to hear a low murmur like a TV show trying to break through the static. I thought that he might be frozen by my stare, but as I watched, he raised his hands slowly and brought them together with a single hard clap. I took off like a shot. I ran and I ran and I ran as the popping followed me. I expected that every step would be my last. A claw would come out or a set of teeth would clamp down on me, and I'd be dragged away to whatever served as its den for digestion or God knows what else. The popping started coming from directly behind me, and I could almost feel the air off those massive hands. I could see lights coming up into view ahead, and I thought maybe I had gotten turned around and I'd find a highway. I didn't care. I wanted someone to help me escape this creature, and I wasn't choosy as to about who. I broke through the tree line to discover that I'd come out on the edge of my parents' farm, and the lights were flashlights as people looked for me. They were calling my name as they got closer to the woods, and I tore off towards the fields in an attempt to stop them from entering. One of them could have just as easily been that thing's next meal, and I wasn't about to draw them to it. I found Dad first, and his beam turned to fix me, and he wrapped me in a hug as he recognized me. God damn, boy, I was so scared that he'd been took. He hugged me close. The first time I'd ever seen my dad show that kind of emotion. And when he called out to them, he found me. I saw them all start to head to his location. The police came. They talked to me. I don't know if they took me seriously or not, but told people to stay out of the woods for a while and to listen for clapping if they were alone. Mickey was the last kid to go missing in the Tiger that year. And when the clapping had come back after that, he seemed better prepared for it. That experience changed me. And I'm glad to say it was for the better. I started taking my schooling a little more seriously. I stopped being so impetuous. I started helping people instead of taking. Changed my way of thinking a lot. I still believe that strong people are important, but now I believe that they have a responsibility to keep those who aren't strong safe. I started volunteering to go out on woodland rescues, searching for people who'd gotten lost or looking for remains. I got approached by the Park Service to see if I wanted to work with them. Now I help educate people so they don't get lost, and I help find those who go missing. In a way, I guess I owe the clapping man a debt. He saved me that night from becoming a monster, too. Although, I really doubt that was his intention. For those of you guys that like to listen to stories, which I assume is all of you since, you're here, check out the Chilling app. I keep saying the Chilling app, and you can start your free trial, blah, 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 over the past couple of years, I think? 2 years? Well, here's some amazing news for all of you. Chilling is currently introducing Chilling 2.0, which brings in a bunch of new features and a fresh new look. Most importantly, Chilling is now free. That's correct, free. Not as in start free trial. I'm saying it's free. You can go to it now and it's free. So once again, like I said, start listening free today. There's links in the description down below if you guys can check that out. And if not, then hey, you're the one who's missing out. Once again, that's the Chilling app. A big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jacob Fensky, Stephanie Butler, Jordan Humble, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Brimstone Pandemonium, Kyle Tuna, William Wellington, Emma, Rena Crow, Lakeda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kincaid, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Mephistopheles, Curse Pox Primarch, Bastion Beefcake, M, Jesus Corneo, Yargul, Clownable, Amber Clark, Jay Kearns, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Adamarius, Estabine, Nate Cull, Our Minsect Time, Xylobones, Angelus, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Lebeda Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Red Shadow Cat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Ika Limchalk, Jody Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Fikamel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Sashi Suzaku, Coconut 509, Stricket, Freddy Krueger, Lisa Cottrell, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Mog, Kiwi the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all of you guys, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for being a huge support to me. Thank you to everybody who's in the description down below, and thank you to everyone who can even support $1 just on Patreon to help keep the content coming. Out and placed on a table near the jury. My family was escorted from the courtroom, and a current affair ended the segment there, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because I remember what had happened next. The detective held up each one of the devices for the jury to examine, and I rocked hard back and forth in my seat next to my lawyer, giddy with pride at my gruesome creation. Valerie knocked again. Ben, are you coming to bed or not? I was contemplating a much more important question, the only one that mattered. In truth, I knew how to kill a monster. I glanced over at the revolver on the counter. That part was easy. But the problem was more complex than that, because how do you kill a monster when it's inside of you? Hey there, everyone who's listening on YouTube, or those of you who are listening on the podcast. It's me, Mr. Creepypasta. And before you head out for the night, I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things. Without you, the show doesn't take place. So, if you guys would like to support the show, or if you guys would like to get your hands on a couple of cool little things whenever new things come out, check out patreon.com/MrCreepypasta. And any support that you guys show, I really appreciate. So everyone who's already donated to the Patreon, I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. I thank you so much for that. If you guys are looking for more Creepypasta Storytime, there's a new video that's uploaded to this channel or uploaded to the podcast every Tuesday. My son's imaginary friend had legs that bent the wrong way, like the crooked legs of a bird. He said every time his imaginary friend walked, the bones would poke out through the skin, yet he was able to move at inhumanly fast speeds, like a character in a video that had been played in fast forward. My son had named this creepy friend Mr. Grimm. Needless to say, I found his new imaginary friend to be a trifle upsetting. When I told my wife about it, she said that it wasn't just upsetting, but absolutely fucking disturbing in every way imaginable. Why do his bones poke through his skin? She asked me. That seems like fairly inappropriate imagery for a 5-year-old. Maybe it's some subconscious projection for some accident victim he saw on TV, I said thoughtfully. She rolled her eyes at this. I don't think they show dead car crash victims with their bones sticking out of their skin on Nickelodeon, she said sarcastically. But we let it go, and continued on with our lives as normal. Johnny continued to talk about Mr. Grimm and the adventures that they went on, and we just kind of got used to it. After all, children have vivid imaginations, and I wasn't the type to read into things too much. As a parent, I knew sometimes you just had to go with the flow and let them develop on their own. That was before pets started to go missing in our neighborhood. So the entire street became covered in missing posters for local cats and dogs. None of their bodies were ever found. I didn't know what to think about it, so I just didn't. I just continued to go to work, spending time with my wife and enjoying life as much as I could. I would take Johnny out on weekend outings to amusement parks or nature trails, but one time when we were hiking together, he said something rather disturbing to me. Mr. Grimm says he knows what happens to kitties and puppies, he said. I looked down at him sharply. Johnny, that's not funny, I said. There are some sick people out there, okay? People who kill little animals for no reason. There are people out there who kill kids for no reason. That's why your mom and I always tell you to avoid strangers. Never get in a car with anyone besides your family. You shouldn't joke about missing puppies and kittens. But Dad, he said plaintively, I wasn't joking. Mr. Grimm said that he took the puppies and kitties with him to his playground. He said that I can come with him too one day. He says that no one hurts puppies or kitties there, or little kids. He said we all live forever with him, and that he never lets us go because he loves us all too much and wants to be with us forever. I looked down at his small, serious face, waves of dread rising inside my stomach. Johnny, Mr. Grimm isn't real, I said. He's just an imaginary friend. That means that he comes from your own mind, just like your dreams. They might feel real, but they're all inside you. He just shook his head at this, like he couldn't believe how slow his old dad was. You'll see soon, Dad, he said. Mr. Grimm is as real as you and me. Maybe even realer, because he says he's been here a long, long time. He says he remembers the roads before there were any cars on them, back when they were all dirt. He says he remembers when horses and donkeys were the only way around. He told me about it. It's pretty weird to think about it, Dad, like how old he is. I didn't know if people could live that long. Johnny, if Mr. Grimm was a real person, and what you said was true, he'd have to be over 130 years old. No one's ever lived that long. It isn't possible. Don't get carried away with this Mr. Grimm stuff, because not everyone will understand like your mom and I do. Some people might think it's a little weird. That was the end of the conversation, and we continued hiking in silence. I was deep in thought, wondering about all the strange things my son said. The next day, kids started disappearing. It started with the Crabtree boy, the next street over. From what I heard, he was playing in the backyard in his sandbox. His mother looked out the window every minute or so while she did the dishes. Then she looked up and he was gone. His toys still in the same position. His little blue baseball cap upside down on the spot where he had been sitting. Mrs. Crabtree sprinted out, looking around frantically and screaming his name. He was just gone. No sign of any strangers in the neighborhood, no suspicious cars, no random leads caught by stoplight cameras or doorbell cameras, so ubiquitous in our little suburban neighborhood. There weren't even any footprints in the sandbox, neither the boys nor anyone else's, except for the tracks that led to the middle of the sandbox where he'd been sitting and playing. It was as if he'd been raptured up into heaven in the space of 60 seconds. The police searched for weeks for that little boy, even using helicopters to search the endless woods that started at the north edge of town. Volunteers from around our county joined in, combing every square inch of the woods within miles, diving into local lakes, checking abandoned buildings, sewers near the children's house. There was not a sign of him anywhere. It was as if he just vanished in the flash of an eye. After weeks of no news, the attention paid to it slowly started to die down. People forgot about the grieving parents and the missing child, like they always do in these kinds of situations. Now, I was extremely busy at work, doing research into quantum entanglement and quantum computers at our state university. My wife had left to go spend some time with her father, who had dementia and cancer, and very suddenly took a turn for the worse. So I ended up having to take Johnny to work. I didn't really mind. I mean, he was a good boy who listened, very rarely got into trouble. The Mr. Grimm thing was the only weird part of his young personality, but other than that, he was a fast learner, respectful, and acted in many ways like a child much older than himself. We entered the quantum research laboratory, his little hand holding mine tightly as he stared around with wide blue eyes. It smelled like cleaning chemicals and burning metal throughout the entire chamber, emanating even out into the hallways of the university building. My son wrinkled his tiny nose, making a comically cute face as he did so. I handed him a pair of safety glasses, putting one on myself before he started up with his usual childlike questioning. "Daddy, why does it smell like that?" he asked me. I shrugged. "There's a lot of machines that consume huge amounts of power," I explained simply to him. "This single building can consume as much power as hundreds of homes like ours. Some of this stuff," I indicated with a wave of my hand, showing the gleaming circular vats, the massive metal tubes, the dozens of computer monitors, the tables with entire arrays of green lasers focused on tiny chips, "is so cutting edge that we haven't found a way to make it use less electricity yet. It can entangle physical particles or make computers that can do certain processes millions of times faster than conventional computers." Most young children wouldn't be able to comprehend the depths of statements like that, but Johnny was not a usual kid. His mind worked incredibly fast, and his vocabulary seemed much more developed than a normal 5-year-old. "Okay," Johnny said simply, letting go of my hand so I could go hang up our coats and put a little plastic bag of food in the fridge. It was late, past dinner time on a Friday, and so the entire lab was already deserted. I was one of the few physicists who did much of his own work at night when all the equipment was open. And I had the entire building to myself. On nights like this, I could play classical music on its highest volume and just be myself. I started playing an MP3 of Shostakovich on one of the many monitors around the lab, then began to move around and switch all the equipment on. My son sat in the corner using colored pencils to draw while I worked. Tonight, I was going to use AI to increase quantum entanglement from just a few particles to a small diamond. Having turned all the machines and monitoring equipment on, I activated the processor and watched the lasers move in unison on the nearby laboratory table. Now pointing at the diamond I had set in the middle of the setup. Johnny looked up as the computers all grew louder. I motioned for him to come close to show him the most interesting part of the entire experiment. A humming, vibrating noise began to spread throughout the floor as the argon lasers became too bright to look at. I put an arm around Johnny, reassuring him. Suddenly, something began to go terribly wrong. The humming vibrations, which had been wave-like and measured, now began to come in chaotic pulsing waves, knocking equipment off the tables. The argon lasers began to falter and move out of position, burning holes in the tables and walls. An enormous crash of rendering metal and glass came from behind me, and I quickly jumped on Johnny, tackling him to the floor and protecting him with my own body until it would be all over. As another computer station fell over, sending shards of glass flying that sliced into my left arm, leaving large droplets of blood on the floor next to us, the power finally went out. And we were submerged in blackness. All I could hear now was Johnny's heavy breathing mixing with my own. Then suddenly I heard the skittering footsteps of something large coming from my right. "Is it over?" Johnny asked in a trembling voice. "I think so, kiddo," I said, reassuringly getting off of him and slowly standing up in the pitch dark. I fumbled in my pockets for my cell phone, turning on the flashlight app and shining it around. At first I saw only destruction, smashed monitors, smoking computers, massive holes everywhere. I thought to myself how lucky we were that the whole place hadn't gone up in flames. And as I kept turning, though, I saw something far more horrific. A small boy stood in the corner with thick, black, stringy hair. His skin looked drained of blood, white as a vampire's, and blood constantly bubbled out of his mouth, sliding down his chin in red streaks. He wore the ragged remains of what must have been a plaid shirt and jean shorts, but they were so bloody and torn that it was impossible to tell. His bare legs were bent the wrong way, and he started to walk towards me slowly like a bird, his knees bending backwards. A bone stuck out through his shins, calves, and thighs, and as he walked, a nauseating cracking sound echoed around the room, like bones loudly crushing and breaking against one another. "Hi there," he said in deep, gurgling speech. "My name, as you surely know, is Mr. Grimm. I am a friend of your son's, and I hope soon a friend of yours." I stood there, speechless, shining my light on this abomination. He bowed slightly and waved his thin, bony arm around the room. "Sorry for the destruction. but I had to take any means to materialize, and the massive amounts of energy in this room were able to give me the physical form I needed. I couldn't keep on as some minor poltergeist. He laughed at this, spraying tiny droplets of blood on the floor in front of him as he did so. I didn't see the humor in it. Look, I said, putting my hands up as if I were dealing with a rabid dog. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding, but you need to go back where you came from. This is not okay. My son and I, we can't have what was he exactly? The monster? A demon? Mr. Grimm waved away my objections with a flick of his hand. This is not up to you, Jack, he said congenially. You cannot send me back. If you try to stop me, I'll kill your son in front of you. And then I'll kill you too. My son's little hand tightened on me. I felt him trembling behind me. Daddy, I'm scared, he whispered to me in a low voice. I want to go home. I know, Johnny, I said quietly. I do too. But what could I do? I had no gun. I wasn't sure if this thing could even be killed anyway. At that moment, the backup generators kicked on and the laboratory was filled with glowing red emergency lights. All right, I said, reaching a decision. My son and I are leaving. Don't follow us. I decided to call 911 and let the professionals deal with this. Maybe they could call in the National Guard, I thought with a small smile. They could fill this thing full of enough full auto weapon fire to leave him looking like Swiss cheese. All right, Mr. Grimm said congenially. I am sorry, but I need your son. He smiled at me, an eerie ear-to-ear grin that showed all of his bloody teeth and the countless sores on the blackened gums. I used a lot of energy materializing, and I need food. I'll let you live, however. Jack, his smile widened, as if he were offering me some kind of present. Just leave the boy, get in your car, and drive home, and you can live a full life. As he spoke, I got an idea. We were much closer to the door than Mr. Grimm. I quickly dropped my phone in my pocket, picked up a large computer, and hurled it at Mr. Grimm's broken legs. I heard a demonic cry of pain, his voice sounding like dozens of voices crying at once in a disharmonized shriek. Ignoring it, I picked up Johnny and ran outside the lab. The door had a number pad on it. I pressed the top button and began to rotate the thumb turn away from the hinges, locking the thick wooden door just as something heavy crashed into it from the other side. The knob turned furiously, but it wouldn't budge without the correct numerical code. Okay, that should buy us some time, I said quickly, grabbing Johnny's hand and running through the blood-red emergency lights. The laboratory began erupting in a cacophony of breaking equipment as I called 911, informing them of an intruder and telling them the man was likely armed and dangerous. Then I got Johnny to my car and we sped out of there. My adrenaline still high, my heart beating hard in my chest. The police ended up finding the laboratory destroyed, but empty. As the days went on, I wondered if the entire thing was some sort of shared delusion. But then, kids started disappearing from our town and the surrounding towns at an alarming rate. I bought a gun for protection, and my neighbors and I began to do a local neighborhood watch. One time while I was out patrolling in the middle of the night, I saw the thing again. Mr. Grimm. I could tell it was him instantly from the way he walked, the crunching of shattered bones and the inhuman speed at which he disappeared into the backyard of a nearby house. I followed him quietly, checking that the safety on my gun was off. I saw a child exiting the back door of his house as Mr. Grimm crept in the bushes. The child looked hypnotized, his eyes blank. Mr. Grimm waved his hand and clicked his tongue, and a small spark of light in the middle of the backyard expanded to show a massive, brightly colored playground. Even though it was night here, on the playground it was daytime. I saw countless kids in it. Some of them were hung in nooses by their necks from the monkey bars. Others were buried alive up to their heads in the sandbox. He had even crucified some on wooden beams on the playset, nailing their hands and feet together as rivulets of blood
Oh,
dripped into the sandbox below. They all had their mouths opened in a shared and silent scream as the hypnotized child walked quietly towards the vision. "No! Stop!" I said, raising my gun to point directly at Mr. Grimm's head. He snarled like a rabid dog at me, beginning to run at me with superhuman speed, his bent legs snapping and popping, and I fired. His head exploded in a shower of black, rotted flesh and maggots, the smell of decomposing meat filling the air. Behind him, the vision slowly closed back into a pinprick of light and then went out entirely. I called the police, telling them the truth, keeping an eye on the strange, demonic body of Mr. Grimm as I did so. It wasn't the police that ended up showing up, but some secretive federal agency that quickly took possession of the body and swore me to secrecy, giving me a check for $100,000 in exchange for signing an NDA that stated I would never tell anyone about the supernatural events that occurred in the last few weeks. I gladly took the check and signed the document. After all, who would believe me?
that last portion with the
For those of you
whole
guys that like to listen to
secret
stories,
agency
which
thing,
assume
I
some of
don't
you, since
really
there's only
buy.
two here,
That
check
felt
out the Chilling.
unnecessary.
I keep saying the Chilling app, and you can start your free trial, blah, 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 over the past couple of years, I think? 2 years? Well, here's some amazing news for all of you. Chilling is currently introducing Chilling 2.0, which brings in a bunch of new features and a fresh new look. Most importantly, Chilling is now free. That's correct, free. Not as in start free trial. I'm saying it's free. You can go to it now and it's free. So once again, like I said, start listening free today. There's links in the description down below if you guys can check that out. And if not, then hey, you're the one who's missing out. Once again, that's the Chilling app. A big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jacob Fensky, Stephanie Butler, Jordan Humble, Chance Burnett, Diana Krause, Brimstone Pandemonium, Cal Tuna, William Wellington, Emma, Rena Crow, Lakeda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kincaid, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Mephistopheles, Curse Pox Primar, Bastion Beefcake, M, Jesus Corneo, Yargul, Clownable, Amber.
That looks pretty good.
Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I want to let you know about tonight's author, Jesse Pullins. Jesse Pullins has a book available now on Amazon. It's actually the second book in a series, A Handful of Horror. Friendly Faces is available now on Amazon. A link can be found in the description down below. And Silent Screaming is available now on Amazon for Kindle and paperback. If you guys like tonight's story, if you like stories from Jesse Pullins, or if you're just into horror shorts at all, I strongly suggest you check out these two books. And now, on to tonight's story. The wall of sand was intimidating before me. I put my car in park and returned my hands to the wheel, my gut twisting at the thought of getting out. The sands of Mount Baldy had changed drastically since the last time I had been there. The notorious hill was roped off and denied human entrance, with markers directing a new path to the beach on the other side. The bittersweet memory that played in my head didn't match what lay before me, and I couldn't help but take it as a sign. Just get this done. Get on your way. Last Band-Aid. My mental coaching didn't make me feel any less sick to my stomach. I looked in the back seat at the neat stack of luggage as I tried to pull myself together. A new life packed into 3 suitcases. I was so close now. This was my last stop before the airport. Why did it have to be the hardest one? I looked back at the sand, the steep wall so smooth it looked like glass. The bittersweet memory returned. Long-lost echoes of a nice kiss, and laughter playing over in my head like a recording. The whispering of a perfect moment in time fading before I felt the hooks of the pain that followed. I shut it out, holding on the hope that when I pulled away from here, the memory would get buried in the sand. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and unlocked it. The screen filled with my reason for being here. The text had bailed me properly, just as well as it intended to. A message from my ex-boyfriend, Brendan. Heard you were leaving town. Can I at least say goodbye? I'll be at our old spot until dusk. I threw open the door and stepped out, not wanting to delay a second longer. The air felt humid in the enclosed parking lot, the border of 4-station trapping the air like a little capsule. I followed the marker to the newest constructed detour and followed the entrance to the trail, starting with a wooden staircase into the foliage. I swallowed hard and crossed the lot. By the time I made it to the landing, a couple was heading down. Sunglasses and faces reddened by the sun, equally cheery and exhausted from a day at the beach. They nodded as we passed each other, and our pleasantries were automatic. Nice day for it. Enjoy. Let's hope so. The miniature boardwalk gave way to a beaten path of loose sand, leaves, and slag. It didn't stand up to the upward beauty of the old dunes, and the man-made trail came with its own sense of foreboding. The trail dipped with the slope of the hill, only to grow steeper the closer you got to the beach. I was thankful for my shoes, but knew the sand would work its way in anyway. The thought of the little grains scrunching between my toes on my flight made me agitated. Maybe after I dealt with this, I wouldn't care so much. I tried to enjoy the beauty of the lakeside wilderness, but my mind kept pulling away to the roller coaster that had been mine and Brendan's relationship. Brendan and I met in college. He was handsome, flirty, had a love of partying. I fell for him immediately. His dorky smoothness, feeling like a breath of fresh air, the monotony of courses that my life had become. In the beginning, it was normal. Nice, awkward hangouts, playing video games together, and flirting after Burger King. It was the first time I really came out of my shell. I wasn't big on the party scene, but wasn't opposed to trying new things. When things got a little more serious and we started sleeping together, I exchanged lonely nights and Netflix with staying over and a bottle of wine. It felt good to let loose, as I spent most of my teenage years studying hard and staying in when everyone else was out having fun. On the days we didn't spend together, we would be off with his friends or staying up getting high. In the beginning, I didn't mind. We were younger. Life's meant for experimenting and having fun. When it was the two of us, he was sweet. And he made our time special. When I got out of my comfort zone enough, we met at Mount Baldy, sharing a joint and watching the clouds as the days passed by. We would always sit on a little cliff spot, overgrown portion of dune, that overlooked the shore a few dozen feet above. We dated for quite a while before things changed. He would show up to classes late or miss them completely. His part-time job would never pan out, and in time, I'd pay for his
Well, that's
food
way
and
too
sometimes
big.
weed and beer. I didn't mind, really. I was totally in love with him and assumed it was just part of his broke college phase. One that would change in time. But it never did. The jobs never lasted. The money never saved. I laughed with him through the highs and stood by him through the lows, watching him drink or smoke away each little paycheck until he was broke and depressed, often trying to sweet-talk me to help him out one last time. In the beginning, I caved. A lot. Sometimes it was just a pint so I can stay up with the boys. Others, it was just enough weed to get me through the weekend. I arrived at a peak in the hill, one accompanied by colorful hazard signs featuring stick figures and peril. I stopped to look, taking a moment to catch my breath a little. The climb was pretty steep to this point, so it was a pleasant distraction. Bold letters warning of the unstable sand in the roped-off area, as well as the threat of riptides when swimming in the lake below. As I continued down the trail, so did my thoughts of Brendan. The longer I went, the more it started to hurt, each step digging up past the wake of my new future. It wasn't always bad, but when every smiling moment was stained with the ugliness of another, it was hard to discern if there was any real happiness in the relationship. As much as I wanted to turn heel and leave, I felt like it was necessary to close this chapter so I could grow, and hopefully one day flourish from it, even if the last goodbye was too little too late. By the time I had started up the hill again, my mind wandered to a carousel of emotion. The good and the bad brought up hand in hand, each a much different moment in time. A passionate hookup in the back seat at the campus, to the pregnancy scare when he was too drunk to pull out. Staying up late watching movies together, replaced by him falling asleep within the first 5 minutes because he was too stoned. Recalling a special time when he cooked me dinner, fading away to him sending me out for fast food late at night because it wasn't safe for him to drive. The trail angled upwards, and my legs continued to autopilot. So did the memories. The sweet purchase of a promise ring, only to see him looking through my purse when he thought that I was sleeping. Long walks and held hands through town, then bailing him out for public intoxication. The first I love yous, buried under the sound of a belligerent argument. The memory of sharing a joint at Mount Baldy, only to recall when I revisit here alone to cry. Spending graduation alone weeks after he dropped out. A promise of how things would get better, only to be forgotten. He was pulled from my recollections to see a fork in the road, and with it, an old wooden sign. 2 arrows pointing in opposite directions, each with an old painted label. The sign on the left read Shore, and on the right, Peak. My guess was I would find Brendan on the right, in our old spot, if there was anything left of it from the erosion. I took a deep breath and headed that direction, into a tight corridor of trees that led to the peak. I hoped he'd be well. I was worried that he wasn't. Ducking into the trees, I realized I wasn't prepared for either. I could feel the breeze from the lake now. Orange and violent rays poked through the trees, accompanied by the faint sound of waves crashing in the distance. The path was tighter. It was dark. The uneven ground within the trees making me anxious. Several long, dried layers of leaves and the remnants of fallen, rotten trees made me feel like I didn't belong, but not as much as the light at the end of the tunnel. The urge to turn and leave was overwhelming, and I felt the preemptive knot forming in my stomach. I tried to relax and breathe, and assure myself that it would be all right. By the time I made it to the peak, I realized I hadn't been breathing at all. Brendan was waiting at the cliff, sitting on the edge quietly as he watched the water below. He seemed to sense my arrival, looking in my direction just as I emerged from the trees. His face lit up for a moment, a split second of hope, before the reminder of why I'd come out. His eyes were hollow, his face slack. A glimmer of a smile tried to shine through, but I could tell it was forced. "Brendan," I said, and he got up from the ledge, sand crumbling away and trickling down to the shore below. "Faye, you made it," he said quietly, brushing himself off. He looked nervous and looked around awkwardly as he approached. "Yeah," I said, looking solemnly at the water. I followed its smooth rhythm from the horizon to the shore, watching it get choppier as it reached the sand. It was a beautiful view and would have been a nice evening if it were any other day. He approached and looked like he was going to offer a hug and decided against it. "Thanks for coming," he said, fidgeting a little before gesturing to me. "You look good." I felt a tinge of sadness as I looked at him. Baggy clothes, torn shoes, his hair and face untrimmed, same as he looked when I left, although he had lost some weight.
Oh God, my brain.
Tired. "You look good too. How have you been? How are things?" I said, wishing I had something better to say. He shrugged, fidgeting again. He looked at the water nervously before looking at his feet. "Same old, you know. One day at a time." He paused to nudge the sand with his shoe before adding, "Not as good as you, though, I bet." My eyes wanted to well up, but I pushed it off. "Is that how you wanted to do this? Make this my fault?" I asked plainly, standing my ground. No, it's not what you think. Look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry is all. That's it. I'm sorry." Brendan put his hands up in defense, Something I'd seen him do 100 times. It felt like it was different this time, but it always felt like that. His eyes were puffy like he'd been crying, and there was something off about his demeanor. He looked rushed, agitated. A cool breeze blew from the lake, and the waves tossed on the shore below. I focused on it and took a deep breath, trying to shrug off the emotion rising within. Brendan fidgeted more, his eyes settling on the ground. "What's going on, Brendan?" I asked, rubbing my temples. I could feel a faint ringing in my ears, what I assumed was the start of a tension headache. "Nothing. It's just... I heard you were leaving. I've been thinking about you a lot, and all the good times we had, the things I'll miss when you're gone. I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for everything. I know I haven't been good to you, and you have every right to move on. I get that. It hurts, you know?
Not bad.
Knowing you'll be gone." Brandon sniffled, fighting back another round of tears. I sighed. The words were familiar, a rehash of a plea from the past. We'd been here before, but no matter how the presentation went, the outcome was the same. "Brandon, I can't live without you." His statement hung in the air, the dead weight of them blocking out the sounds of the lake. I tried to look into his eyes, but he seemed unable to look at me. "That's what this is about? One last attempt to keep me in. I'm done, Brendan. You know that. Is that why you called me out here?" "I'm leaving the country. I know," he protested. "I have a flight in an hour. I can't... You think I'd just drop everything and give you one more chance? After all this time? No. Then why am I here?" I just... Brendan sighed, looking at the lake once more. "I wanted to talk, that's all. I wanted to say goodbye." "Have you been drinking?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. Brendan took it like a silent slap, a single tear running down his cheek. No. I'm clear. I've never been this clear." I didn't know what to say. The water started getting choppier, the waves slapping into the shore more aggressively. There were no words I could say to make this better, no way to smooth it over. After a moment of silence, Brendan shuffled over to the spot that he was sitting and sat back down. I looked at the corridor of trees. My exit. Brendan started to cry, holding his face in his hands. The sound still wounded me. I checked the time on my phone. Still had a little bit. I sighed and sat next to him. After a while, he spoke again. "You remember when we used to sit out here? Just us, watching the waves?" he said quietly. The memory of us smoking together and me bawling alone. "Yeah." Brandon sniffled and wiped his eyes, and together we watched the lake. I watched the slow rear back of the next wave and listened to the collective whoosh as it prepared to hit the shore. Underneath the peace of it all, it felt angry. He said nothing for a time, collecting himself. I could tell he wanted to say more, so I waited. "There's been this pain inside of me for a long time now. I don't know how to get rid of it. It didn't start when you left. It's been there. And I've been trying to ignore it, trying to dull it. Nothing seems to work. Ever since you left, I just can't take it anymore. It's too much. It's gnawing at me every day." As I listened, my eyes drifted to the lake. A strange, pale shape drawing me in that poked through the water. a slow, bulbous birth that rose unnaturally through the water's surface. The ringing noise was starting to get stronger, like it was echoing over the waves. Brendan, I can't do it. Everything in the world, the weight of it all, I don't have it in me. I'm just tired. Too tired. The weight's too heavy. I don't think I can do it without you. What are you saying? I asked, half looking at him and half looking at the water. The more I looked at the shape, the more it looked like a face. Were you ever happy? With me, he said, and I looked at him. His lips were quivering, tears streaming down both cheeks. I reached out and touched his shoulder, and it only made it worse. You know, I was happy for a lot of it, but you couldn't. I couldn't. In the distance, the shape continued to rise. The pale, scarred face of a head gave way to a neck, and with it, shoulders. Do you see that? Is there someone... Brendan looked at it and paid it no mind like it wasn't there. The pain has to end. I can't take it. Especially if you're not with me. I'll sink. I can't do it. Buried under the weight of it all, the pain is too much. Through the water, a torso followed the head. Bloated and white, the skin and muscle tattered. Like it had been beaten by the waves for a long time. The face looked up at us, eyes like two black pearls, most of its lips missing around its mouth, its jaw a tight clamp of exposed teeth. Brendan, what is that? Do you see it? I asked, and he ignored me. Whatever it was almost out of the water. A torso covered in pulpy gashes and little bites. Saturated strands of flesh dangled from every light-colored wound. Once its shriveled nudity rose from the water, I shook Brendan. Brendan, what the fuck? Aren't you tired, Faye? He looked into my eyes. His glazed and defeated stare, burrowing deep. He didn't even look at it. But I knew he knew. The wind picked up an icy gust that shivered my bones. I couldn't explain it, but it felt wrong. Brendan refused to look away from me. Even as dripping toes hovered over the water, the pieces in my mind didn't make sense. But the look in his eyes told me it was his doing. Brendan, what have you done? He blinked away the accusation, tears trickling. Another crashing wave louder than the last. I found something to take it away, was all he said before lightly shaking his head. What? How? What did you do? I asked, watching the swollen being drifting closer. There was an inaudible malice to it, the way its lifeless gaze peered up at us from the lake. With every gaining inch, there was an unrealistic static to its float, and the water's surface rippled beneath. Brendan finally looked at it, the sickening acceptance in his eyes. Thoughts of our past raced through my mind, and through the frantic catalog, I wondered how it all went horribly wrong. I was there for him. I tried. Thoughts of shared smiles, dreamy eyes, laughs ran through my mind, but the primal urge to flee pushed itself to the front. We should go. We should go now, I urged. But he didn't listen. It should only hurt for a moment, he said, and looked out at the lake. The monster was close enough I could see the wispy remains on its scalp. I couldn't watch him die. Not like this. You don't have to do this. We can run. Let me help you, I pleaded. Brendan just sat there, the wind tossing his shaggy hair. To my surprise, he started to smile. He leaned against me, and even though his whispers were soft, it cut right through me. I told him he could have us both. I looked at him, and he started to laugh. A maniacal, unhinged cackle that echoed over the beach. The monster over the water was getting closer, its feet dangling over the sand as it drifted in. I looked into its abyssal eyes, and the ringing in my ears started to blare. Brendan's text message played through my head over and over. Can I at least say goodbye? I got up from the ledge and ran. Brandon's laughter echoed even as I disappeared into the trees. I ran as fast as the sand would let me, panic settling in and the sand bogged down my footing. Each hurried stride kicked dust in all directions. I passed the sign for the fork in the road and quickly descended the downhill portion of the trail. The air was cold now, chilling the sweat on my forehead as I reached the dip and proceeded to climb. My legs burned as I went as fast as I could, huffing through every clumsy step. The pain has to end, especially if I'm not with you. Brendan's words taunted me as I ran, every footfall haunted by his laughter and the harrowing, floating corpse. Aren't you tired, Faye? By the time I made it to the bold warning signs, the sounds of the waves had faded. I took a moment to catch my breath, my lungs burning from the rapid hike. There was no wind in the trees, no breeze from the lake, only the stagnant humidity of the forest. I looked to see if there was anyone on the trail or the parking lot below, but there was no one in sight. The sun was setting, and dimness was falling quickly. Off in the distance, I heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like Brendan, but the longer it went, the higher it got. It was like his voice was being ripped apart. And then it was gone. I turned heel and ran, pushing down the wooden staircase I had climbed not long ago. I jogged across the parking lot to my car, already fumbling the keys from my pocket. I unlocked the door, shoved the key into the ignition, and started the car. Ahead of me was the wall of sand. It was so flat and pristine, and the clarity of it made me wonder if any of this was even real. Maybe I had just made it up in a panic. An excuse to break away from Brendan. Maybe my guilt or selfishness had gotten the better of me and I pretended that it was there so that I had an out. Maybe I just had a panic attack. Ahead, the sand started to tremble. Little granules vibrating and skittering like the dunes themselves are scared. The center of the wall started to shift, and with a deafening blast of sound, a balding head pushed through, two unblinking black eyes staring at me. I threw it in reverse and backed out of my spot, wincing against the rigging as the monster forced its way towards me. The tires squealed as I left the dunes behind me, merging back onto the road, widely with my foot pushing the pedal to the floor. I stayed on the road for a while, cutting back through town until I hit the highway. I drove straight to the airport, focusing on the speedometer and the occasional check in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me except the slower cars and shrinking roads as I left the nightmare behind me. I pushed away thoughts of it as I arrived at the hectic roundabout of the airport, monotonously pulling in and surrendering my car to a valet. I cut my luggage from the back seat and proceeded through the TSA and numbly checked in for my flight. Each time I looked out the windows of the terminal, I saw nothing but the congested traffic of vehicles outside and the correlated populace within. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. There's no feasible way. Brendan was just crazy. It must have been stress. I just blew it out of proportion. I saw what I wanted to see. Boarding the plane, I left the past behind. No more guilt. No more pain. As we broke through the clouds, I settled into my seat and thought of a better future. I arrived at the hotel in the middle of the night. The streets were dark and empty, but I embraced the unknown environment and let it wash my old life away. I have a busy day tomorrow. There's so much to do on the road ahead. But for now, I'm too tired to think about it. The sheets are soft. The bed is comfortable. I turn on the TV for some white noise. I hope it'll drown out this ringing in my ears. I just want to point you guys in the direction of the snake's paw. Now, if you guys are listening right now on a podcast, then hey, you're pretty much already there. If you're not listening on the podcast and you're listening on the YouTube, then hey, you're basically already there. The Snake's Paw is written by Jack Townsend, who also happens to write Tales from the Gas Station.
Wait, really?
And Finding Vanessa, which I've heard that some of you people like. If you want to find some more of his amazing writing, as well as a full cast of voices that is brought to life within this amazing podcast that's hilarious and frightening at the same time, then I strongly, strongly suggest you check it out. That's The Snake's Paw. And you can also go to thesnakespaw.com. A big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez.
Aww. Eh, maybe some other time. Guess we can continue on with this one.
Is that the only thing we're looking for? Finn scrunched up his face, holding a metal screw beneath his teeth. It says with roofs on a head. A roof on his head? Finn took the screw out of his mouth, securing it to the tree with a frown. Roots on his head, he corrected me. A teenage girl saw him. So did at least 4 kids just the other day. He was at the edge of the woods near the school, and they said his head and face were covered in roots like a helmet or a mask. That fucker's been spotted for months, and even though we both know his type, can't leave the tree line. Every kid who sees him says he tries to lure them in, but been a long time since any kids actually went missing. Until just recently. My frown became more of a grimace the longer I listened. Seeing this root-faced asshole didn't sound fun, but seeing any of those kids becoming one with the forest sounded even worse. I thought of Jennifer, her body stuffed into the tree, every limb broken and her mouth gaping, silent scream filled with twigs and grass, and then I thought of Daniel's description of her when she came back. There. Finn patted the tree, shaking one of the thicker branches to test the camera's sturdiness. It didn't budge. That one's set. We'll put up another on the edge of the tower. Think you can check the supply closet and see if we've got a few long extension cords? I snapped a flattened hand to my forehead in a salute, leaving just as the former officer was climbing down the ladder. The days were getting warmer, the air muggier, and it made the trip back up to the broadcast room a lot rougher on the lungs. I was out of breath when I reached the top, and Daniel, in a classic pain-in-the-ass fashion, snickered with a stupid grin on his face. What? Did he make you climb the tree yourself? He bit his lip mid-chuckle. Shut up. I was pulling open the storage closet door and crouching down to check the boxes upon boxes of useless junk hidden at the bottom. I dug around, finding a lot of old recording equipment, some broken microphones and headsets, a few frayed cords. I used a foot to push the biggest box out of the closet and crawled in looking for one further in. It was then I saw something I'd never noticed before. Hey, Danny boy, I asked, turning to Daniel as I pointed into the closet. There's something back here, like a, it's a tiny little door. That's it, it's a tiny little door. I watched him squint his eyes, brows lowering as he abandoned the controls and joined me outside the open closet door. Without hesitation, he was down on his hands and knees as well, experiencing the full glory of cobwebs and the slight scent of mold. With a flashlight pulled out of the cardboard box and shining its light at the wall, he confirmed what I had seen. Way in the back, near the corner of the closet, a cheap piece of plywood was covering a roughly 6-inch-ish square spot of the wall. It wasn't just leaning against it, but it had been nailed down. Specifically, though, to cover whatever it was that was behind it. A patched hole in the wall, Dan asked, turning the light towards me. I shrugged. No clue, but it creeps me out. We silently looked at the piece of board, then at one another, back and forth, as if waiting for someone to make the first move and start digging around for a hammer. Given enough time, maybe I would have been that person, but all hopes of investigating further were put on hold as the broadcast room door squeaked open. I heard Finn's heavy boot steps enter, then stop after just a couple of paces. Silence, and then... Seriously, between the both of you, neither can find an extension cord? I was the first to attempt crawling out of the closet, knowing that Finn probably didn't want to have a conversation with just my ass. I only managed to smack my head on the doorframe once as I crept back, pointing my index finger to the largest box already removed from the closet. They're all, in there, I told him, tired of his attitude. Hell, he was probably tired of mine too. We found something else though. Finn dug around in the box, pulling out a long green cord and tossing it aside to look for another. For a moment there, his curiosity got the better of him and he tore his eyes away from his project to look at me. What'd you find? I don't know what it is, I answered honestly. Finn simply shrugged, slinging 3 long cords over his shoulder. If it's nothing we can use, it's not important. Now start looking through the manuals. I'm gonna get these cameras fired up. After snaking wires over every inch of the station and running back and forth to readjust the cameras a few times, I started to actually forget about the little door in the back of the closet. It was like a passing curiosity that it passed. But when the cameras were set and Finn bid his farewell for the day, the stillness set in again. It was just Daniel and I, sitting at our respective places at the desk, eyes darting between the radio controls and the fuzzy, pixelated images on the monitors. Me? I already wasn't a huge fan. Every time I looked up, I expected to see something. I just didn't know what it would be. And looking for anything else to focus on, my gaze found its way back to the cracked, open closet door. I really want to know what's in there, I said to Daniel with a sideways glance. I watched the gears turning in his head. He couldn't resist the temptation either. I knew it. This was just a matter of who would be the one to smash the door open. I'll get a hammer if you hold the light for me. I never was the patient one. I didn't realize just how much shit was hidden in the back of that closet until all of a sudden it was removed and thrown out into the broadcast room. We got rid of it all. Every box, every bit of old tech, just outdated or broken machines stored away for parts. Finally, it was just us, the little door, and my fingers making a fist around the handle of a hammer. Maybe it was a little too therapeutic smashing that piece of plywood to bits, because I immediately gave up trying to simply pull the nails out of the wall cleanly. If anything living had been hiding in there, it would certainly have chewed its way out in any direction other than that one. But as we pulled away bits of wood, it splintered and rusted old nails. What we did find inside was even more perplexing. Cassette tapes? Daniel picked one up gingerly between his fingers, blowing dust off the surface. Oh man, you ever seen one of these? Yeah, I had a shit ton as a kid, I said. Britney, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. Backstreet Boys were better though. Daniel scooped up a few more of the cassette tapes, a snort of laughter under his breath. I don't think these are the same kind of tapes, Lynn. Though I do agree Backstreet Boys were better. That hole in the wall was bigger than we thought. We found over a dozen cassettes hidden back there, and in one of the boxes of old equipment, we dug on a cassette recorder that was still in working condition. It was tempting to stick in a tape and immediately see what was on it, but just from a glance, we could tell they were meant to be in some sort of order or something. Faded Sharpie marker was written on masking tape stuck to the center of each one. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on and so forth until tape number 14. That's where we lost one. 15 was gone, but 16 was there, and, well, it was as good a start as any. I looked at the time. It was just a few minutes after 7:30, and Daniel's shift ended in 2 hours. Think we've got time to see if one works? He asked me. And I'm certain you can guess my answer. I listened to tape number 1 twice in a row. Once just to listen, and the second time to transcribe for Daniel in writing. It was a journal entry of sorts, the voice of a man crackling through the dusty player. Some spots on the tape were pretty damaged, but I did my best to write down exactly what I heard. This is the entirety of tape number 1.
Today is November 20th, 2012. My name's Eric, and I'm number 7. The 7th person to work at the Pine Haven Emergency Broadcast Station. This morning at approximately 5:15, I pulled my old climbing gear out of the shed in order to assist the police in retrieving number 6 from the radio tower. His legs are still missing from the knees down, but at least now we found the torso. I'm a former conservation officer. I spent 4 years in wildlife rescue. I've studied the mountain terrain, the deep marshland, and the rehabilitation of injured animals, mainly birds of prey. It's my hope that there won't be a need to replace me, but I want this recording to survive whether I do or not. At 4:30 this morning, I was awoken by a sound from up above. It was chilling. Sound of metal scraping and whining, like something attempting to scale the radio tower, was almost as grating to my ears as the sound of radio static. I realized the latter was a huge problem immediately. My very first lesson upon arriving was to never let the radio go off the air, under any circumstances. And doing so would unleash horror I don't even want to imagine. I tried my hand at quickly repairing the signal, but after pressing all the buttons I can get my hands on, I realized the problem was outside. I could still hear it. Something was climbing up the radio tower, messing with the signal. I didn't even think those things from the woods could get this far away from the tree line, but their craftiness knows no bounds. With nothing left to do but take action, I raced down from the watchtower to get a good look from the ground. It was still dark outside, freezing cold like you wouldn't believe. Flashlight in hand, I shone it up at the metal tower looming over the former Firewatch building. First thing I saw was a blob of flesh in so many different tones and textures, but it wasn't just one thing up there. There were birds, at least a dozen of them, picking at the wires, messing with the signal. Their wings and voices made an ungodly noise as they all fought for pieces of electrical cable to rip away and take with them. But wrapped in the metal bars, holding onto the tower with a weight that seemed to put it in danger of falling over, was the most grotesque beast I had seen since my arrival. This thing looked like a deer at first glance, but its eyes were pure white. Its fur was a dusty gray, caked in mud and rot. Antlers smacked the metal around it as it moved its head, making a massive amount of noise. But what struck me most about it was the sheer inability I had to recognize all that it was made of. It had more than 2 eyes, 6 at least. I saw a glimpse of giant hooves, claw-like hands, and perhaps limbs that weren't even necessary, but it moved in such slithering motions in the dark that it was difficult to make out the details. All I knew was that this was an animal I had never seen the likes of before, and it was enormous. It didn't shamble clumsily up to the tower, no. This monster was crouched up high, its filthy claws holding a bundle of flesh and cloth. It was number 6, at least from the waist up, one arm missing and his skin about 3 days decomposed. I'd seen this bastard before. And like with all freakish abominations in the woods, I knew better than to try to fight it. They don't die, you see. They just end up absorbed by the others. I did the only thing I could think to do. I just ran back towards the door, my intentions only going so far as starting the bell. The drone that had been driving them away for years. Perhaps one of the least desired sounds I could possibly hear just then was the screech of stressed metal underneath the beast's weight. I listened as it shifted, its dead, empty eyes following me as it was inspired to make a change of course. From the corner of my eyes, I could see it leave number 6 far up, tangled in the metal structure, and begin to crawl its way down, hooves clumsy, but long claws making up for it with added dexterity. Like the strongest, most grotesque spider I'd ever seen, it quickly scaled the tower downward. And just as I reached the door that would take me inside, I could feel the weight of the beast as its feet hit the ground. Its hooves pounded on the ground, dirt beneath it trembled with each quickening step it took. It let out a deafening roar that made the insides of my ears sting. And that's when I threw myself inside and slammed the door behind me. I could hear the creature ramming its antlers against the door the entire time I ascended to the broadcasting room. Once at the top, I could see the figure of the beast still outside, resting from its attempts to break in, and instead staring at me from far below. Then, after pressing the red button on the wall and hearing what sounded like nothing to my ordinary human ears, I watched the dreaded animal begin to stagger and shake its head before turning to bound back past the tree line. The radio's up and running now. Number 6 has been retrieved from the radio tower, though no one is sure if his uncovered parts were eaten or misplaced. One other thing that's been bothering me, though, the small mountain bird has been sitting outside the window for a very long time now, and the way it taps its beak on the glass, it's getting on my nerves.
Listening to the tape was insightful, but unpleasant. Knowing that Daniel and I were the only surviving people to have worked at the station made hearing the voice of one of our own seem like a mournful experience. The man in the recording was dead. At some point, somewhere, and somehow, the forest had won, and he had to rely on these tapes to tell his story. "You think this will be us one day?" I asked Daniel with a sly smirk, but the suggestion wasn't humorous in the least. Rating all of our own stories on a cassette, saving them for other people to find when we're gone. I watched him pop the tape out of the machine, blowing the dust off of it like an old game cartridge and placing it back with the others. "Nah," he answered in a mock casual tone. "I will use a flash drive." This is Evelyn from 104.6 FM. It's good to be back on the air. In the early hours of the morning, before the sun was up and before Daniel was on his way into work, I saw something I couldn't explain. You might think I mean something supernatural or otherwise inhuman, but it was quite the opposite. We had a visitor to the broadcast tower. I could see someone, their face obscured by a dark hoodie that covered their hair and eyes, equally dark-colored clothes covering the rest of their body as well. It was clear from the way they stalked around outside the building that they weren't looking to come inside and chat. It was almost 5 o'clock in the morning, a time when I would usually still be sleeping for another hour, but a bathroom break had proven timely as I got a perfect view of our new stalker looking around the outside of the tower. Now, usually, calling the police would be the natural response, but out of some curiosity for what this mysterious weirdo was up to, I was just distracted by watching them poke around outside. Their actions seemed curious, but not aggressive. First, they marched around, peering through gaps in the wooden walls of the shed, then walking along the tree line and shuffling their feet in the dirt for a bit. It was as if they weren't looking for anything in particular, but still searched for anything they might come across. I left for only a few minutes, starting a pot of coffee and resigning myself to an early start to the day. Fog was in the weather prediction, and I'd need all the energy I could get to act fast if need be. While I waited at the square plastic table in the break room, tapping at my phone screen and trying to coax the tiniest bit of internet out of it, I never took my eyes or ears completely off of the stairwell or the broadcast room windows. Sure, Creepus Maximus out there seems simply curious at most, but aside from the eerie feeling that they gave me, it was my job to make sure no one stepped into the forest. I stirred sugar into my coffee cup, dropped the spoon into the sink with a clank, and groggily made my way towards the door. Before I did, I heard a sound that was a little too familiar. It was a whisper. So faint, but so sharp in my ears, and it was coming from the kitchen sink. Oh, God, I thought we were done with this a long time ago. My gaze was stuck on the drain, glaring at it and trying to decipher quiet, mumbling bits of sound that didn't quite form full words. I only took one step closer to it before I decided hanging my head right over the source wasn't an intelligent idea. I watched bubbles rise from the basin, as if liquid down the drain was boiling. The bubbles popped and formed more in their place, splashing tiny pinpricks of dark red fluid all around the inside. A rancid smell was coming from deep down in the plumbing. Immediately, it turned me off from my coffee, which I dumped down the exact same drain in what I now suppose could have been a somewhat accidentally rude gesture. The voice stopped. She had apparently said all that she needed to say this time. I had lost my coffee, but gained some tense nerves as I staggered back into the broadcasting room, the quiet nature of the moment convincing me for a time that our visitor had left. I stretched my arms, took a peek at the clock sitting at the side of my desk, and then nearly jumped out of my skin. A hoarse yelp left my throat when I happened to glance outside, getting a full view of that familiar hooded figure standing directly on the other side of the window at the top of the fire escape. Both hands were in the pockets of his sweater, but I could see a human nose, a human mouth. It's difficult to explain this very specific kind of fear, seeing someone only a few feet away from you, but still very much separated. He was real, he was alive, and the fact that this wasn't a shambling, half-decayed monstrosity of human and animal parts made him almost more threatening to me than the rest. I could get rid of monsters with a single button. I couldn't get rid of this quite so easily. Almost as soon as I spotted him, he turned and pulled his hood further over the features of his face, darting down the fire escape. Faintly, I could hear the metallic sounds of his footsteps racing away one after the other, until at last I could no longer hear or see him anywhere in the pre-sunrise darkness. The last glimpse that I got was of his feet through the grass as he turned the corner of the tower's base and headed towards the gravel parking lot. Calling the police would have been a very sensible reaction, and you'll be glad to know that I did call someone. I had absolutely no trouble waking Finn up at 5 in the morning and telling him that we had what could have been an attempted break-in at the broadcast station. I'm going to be optimistic and say that his exasperated curse words and tired sighs were in reaction to the hooded creeper and not to my phone call. I waited in the stairwell, confident that I'd hear plenty of ungodly noise if someone tried to crawl up the fire escape and break into the recording room while I was gone. The only footsteps, however, I heard were that of our brand new guard dog, Finn himself. When he entered, using his own key and pushing open the jam metal door, he took one look at me and I could practically hear the sound of static as the hair stood on the back of his neck. Jesus shitting Christ. He slammed the door behind him, a puff of dust flying from the floor. I come in here looking for an intruder and see you sitting there in the dark looking like a goddamn ghost. You scared every last fuck right out of me. So, thanks for that. While Finn wasn't working for the police anymore, he still had his walk that radiated a sense of purpose, as if he was always on his way to fix a problem. He marched around the ground level before passing me on the stairs. "You said you saw a guy out here poking around," he asked me. Yeah, outside. Never came in, though." I pointed a finger upwards. "I saw him while I was upstairs. First he was sneaking around by the tree line, then I saw him come up the fire escape. He was kind of scoping the place out, I think, but ran like a chicken shit when he figured out that I could see him." My footsteps echoed with a distinct metallic sound through the empty room, cradled by the wooden stakes holding the top room up. As I followed Finn upstairs, I only gave one last glance at the doorway. It was sealed and safe, but that heavy metal door never ceased to give me any anxiety. "So he's not here anymore. He ran?" Finn waited to ask until I had caught up to him. "Far as I know, he's gone." I used my key to get us into the broadcasting room, which was still dimly lit as the end of the Night Owl block played automatically over the radio. Finn looked less than amused, thick block-shaped fingers reaching up to rub the bridge of his nose, veins in the back of his hand prominent when he clenched them. "You called me about a break-in that never happened?" he clarified. "You called me about an intruder who is gone. Evelyn, why the hell am I out here?" At this point, I had seated myself in the rolling chair I claimed as my own, Daniel's seat left empty. He wasn't due to come in for a couple of hours, and perhaps that knowledge made me a little more willing to admit what had actually come to mind. "Because I know who it was," I spoke honestly. "And I was scared." With only a little while longer before the automatic playlist ended for the night and my responsibilities as radio DJ resumed, Finn decided to stick around and sit next to me while we poked through a few of the recordings from our security cameras. I was still clumsily figuring out how to review the footage, but luckily, it wasn't too hard to go back such a short amount of time. Before long, we were staring at a paused image of the man I saw outside, this time from the tree's perspective, as he inspected the very spot where the forest stopped and the clearing began. "So who is this guy?" Finn asked as he zoomed the screen in on the blurry, half-visible face beneath the hood. The poor quality of the night vision camera made his face look hollow and even more chilling than reality. "His name's Elijah," I answered. "At least, I almost sure that's him. I never saw his eyes or his hair, but there's a resemblance. He was dating my friend Jennifer when she decided to go into the woods and not come back. I watched Finn's mouth curve into a thin-lipped frown. One of thought, I think. I wasn't an investigator of any sort, but even I could put two and two together. Think he was here trying to mess with you, maybe? Considering this is where she disappeared. I almost said yes, but I couldn't make myself believe that in full. I could understand why he'd hold a grudge. His girlfriend went missing and was found dead right outside my workplace, and his last memory of me was the one final blowout fight. Anyone who says breaking up with a best friend is cake compared to breaking up with a partner has never had a friendship that meant as much as ours did. But Elijah's behavior didn't seem standard for that sort of thing. With a skeptical shrug of the shoulders, I said the only other theories that came to mind. Maybe, but it looked to me like he was searching for something. Maybe her. I mean, look, her case was just closed before they ever found the body. But when he came up the fire escape, I felt like he was trying to intimidate me more so than like actually breaking in. The door was 3 feet away, but he never even tried it. If he had, the alarm would have blared, and only a really desperate son of a bitch would stick around during all of that. Then again, maybe he was a desperate son of a bitch. But speaking of desperate, hey, Finn? I broke a solid moment of silence with a very different tone. Dan and I have somewhere to be this weekend. I'll split part of this week's paycheck if you take over for a bit. The look on his face was hard to read at first, almost as if he didn't understand the words coming out of my mouth. Yes, I thought. I'm not too proud to ask you to do my job. Is it important? He asked, surprising me by not outright refusing. Yeah, we're going to his cousin's wedding. You'd think my answer was a joke from the way he suddenly spat out a laugh as if it had just crept up on him out of nowhere. I admit I was a tad insulted that he didn't take it seriously, but between his giggles and my grumpy, wrinkled brow, he gave me a surprising answer. Sure, fine. I'll let you have your break. You look about a month overdue for one. The hell does that mean? The question was bitter, even though I knew he wasn't wrong. Settle down, sheesh. I could still change my mind. Finn's chuckles died down, but he still wore the same rotten smirk. Promise you'll dance with Dan at least once, and we've got a deal. There wasn't much on this earth aside from shoving a hornet's nest up my ass that would make me dance. That being said, I guess we still had a deal. 6 o'clock in the morning came around, then 6:30. When the sun was rising and all seemed quiet out at the tree line, Finn was about ready to leave just as I had set up my headset and broadcasted my morning greeting over the air. In the middle of my speech, I gave him a lazy wave, one of his legs already out the door and eager to return home. The music was playing, and I half expected to take off my headset and hear nothing, or perhaps only the very distant sound of Finn's vehicle driving back onto the road, or maybe even Daniel showing up a little early. You can imagine my surprise when the muffled suggestion of voices, multiple voices, was all I heard through the gap beneath the door. They sounded agitated. At least one sounded angry. My finger tapped the base of my microphone, turning it off before swiftly leaving the seat in my chair. Curiosity got the best of me, as well as some stubborn kind of territorial attitude. As much as I hated this place, it was growing too synonymous with my everyday life for me to not defend it. There was no one in the stairwell, no shadows outside the door, and still I could hear unintelligible but aggravated raised voices from outside. The heavy metal door swung open and I practically marched around the side of the tower, Finn's yells finally becoming clear. What I didn't expect as I rounded the corner was to almost get hit by a flying body, as whatever argument had ensued didn't stay verbal for very long. I got a split-second view of a dark-colored sweatshirt as Finn practically threw his assailant onto the gravel, knocking the wind out of a very red-faced, very breathless Elijah. He was back, now in full daylight. He got me good. I almost didn't recognize Daniel's voice from behind me, nasally as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Finn had Elijah under control. He was already pinning him to the gravel parking lot, one arm twisted behind his back to keep him immobile. Judging by the scuff on Dan's cheek and the way that he squinted his watering eyes, Finn was probably the only one of the three to come out unscathed. Did he break your nose? I asked, reaching up to grab Dan's chin, tilting his head up. Don't touch it! I won't, I assured before he finally dropped his hand, letting me get a peek. No blood, just a big red mark that would probably start to swell. I think you'll live, Danny boy. Elijah, only putting up a mild struggle as his cheek was pushed painfully into the loose stone, huffed in frustration as Finn pulled his wallet and a folding knife out of his pocket.
Not bad.
What were you planning on doing with this? He asked, extending the blade to show him. Nothing. It wasn't a good answer, as Finn only twisted his arm further behind his back to coax a pained yell out of him.
So
Stop it! I wasn't gonna use
dope.
it. It was just for show. Finn folded the knife back up and tossed it away from the parking lot where it
So
disappeared into
dope.
the
Okay,
tall
let's-
grass and bushes.
let's go in and take a look.
So, you're trying to tell me you were just here to poke around and then leave? He voiced a skeptical chuckle. This time, Elijah turned his head to glare daggers up at the man with a knee in his back. Isn't that what you did? He asked in a hoarse, seething voice. I watched the news, you know. You searched for Jennifer for maybe a whole hour before you gave up and closed the case. You never tried. No one tried. Everyone's saying she's dead, but we can't even bury her because no one's even looking. Finn's gaze, as stern as ever, fixed itself on him first, and then up to me. This was making sense now. If Elijah didn't have anyone to blame for his girlfriend's death, the most that he could do is blame the ones who failed to bring her back. There was a tense moment of attempted understanding as Finn loosened his hold on Elijah's arm, letting him rest and dropped the limb to his side. It may have been summer, but I felt a chill in the air, like a tickling wind, just cold enough to raise bumps on the skin. It made the leaves rustle and the grass blow. From outside, the heavy wooden stakes holding the tower up sounded like a weak, groaning animal as they settled. I didn't want to be out here anymore. Elijah. I spoke softly to him, one-on-one for the first time. You should go home. Even when Finn released his arm and stood to take the weight off the other man's back, he still took his time sitting up with sluggish, aching movement. You don't know, he told me, expression weary and his lips in a frown. You don't have to live surrounded by her things every day. The shitty thing is, he was absolutely right. The wind hit me again, branches creaking overhead and the clouds slowly covering the sparse rays of sunlight with it. It brought another groan from the wood, this time more...
Maybe another rock right there, or maybe a shrub.
Daniel had long since stopped nursing a swollen nose and was shifting where he stood. I knew he felt it too. The too familiar agitation of a skipping heartbeat and the desire to get somewhere safe. I never realized how tall the trees were from down here. I squinted my eyes at the woods, my hair tickling my nose and chin in the breeze. I heard another creak from the tower. No. Beyond the tower. The woods. I never realized how little we could see when we weren't 50 feet in the air. Daniel and I shared a glance. He was touching his arm, feeling the prickling of goose flesh on his skin, and that was enough of a reason to abandon whatever stupid problems we thought we had down here. Fog day, everyone upstairs. You too. I pointed to Elijah, who seemed to be the only person who didn't understand our urgency. Finn pulled the back of his sweater to help him up, much like a mother cat picking up her kittens by the scruff, while Daniel and I trusted that they could get up the stairs without us holding their hands. Dan had the door swung open by the time I rounded the edge of the building, holding it wide and patting my shoulder to get me through the door first. Next was Finn, who stomped heavy boots up the winding staircase after me. My hands fumbled once as I reached the top of the stairs, looking for the right key to unlock the broadcast room, all thanks to our new security. I still hadn't found it when I realized that the two of us were on the top landing. Elijah, hurry up! We need to get inside! Daniel was yelling out the door to an unseen man somewhere between us in the woods. I was only partially watching my coworker as I sifted through my pockets, realizing at a moment's notice that my keys were exactly where they didn't need to be. In my bag. Inside the fucking room. Dan! Yelling down the entire length of the stairs made my throat burn. Dan, I need your keys! I need your keys! He
It's
turned
pretty
to look
cool.
at me, but his expression didn't register understanding.
Pretty
Without the
cool.
line in the right
I
distance to read
like
my
it.
lips, I
I
suppose
like
he'd
it a
heard his
lot.
own name, and that was about it. I
A
swore
lot.
an oath then that I'd start using my spare time to brush up on American Sign Language, all while pushing past Finn to stomp back down the stairs and tell him face to face, I need... As soon as my feet hit the bottom landing, neither Daniel or I were paying attention to one another. Our eyes were collectively drawn to the tree line, where heavy, swirling clouds of gray crawled their way into the clearing, and where Elijah was standing with his back to us, still as the dead. Let him go. Let him get swallowed. The thought was tempting, but sick. I had more to worry about than one man standing outside like a moron, but I couldn't do it. It was our job to make sure that no one else ended up like Jennifer Cook. What are you looking at? Get in here! I raced out the door, but I wasn't alone. Daniel reached him before I did, immediately grabbing hold of one arm, which was quickly swatted away. Elijah
It's actually
never
really
looked at
cool.
us, but
Really
from
cool.
beside him, I could see his eyes glazed in an almost trance-like state. He was watching dark, shapeless motion from within the clouds, billowing.
Okay. So, there's a few things about this section of the level that still need to be done, but can really only be done at the end. One, I need a trigger box here that activates when both me and the quest follower go through it. As soon as we both go inside of this trigger box, this gate will close and the other gate at the other end will close. Well, I guess that one at the other end might already be closed. Anyways. Well, yeah, the other one should be closed too. That's what I should do. Um, Yeah, that's one thing. Another thing I gotta do is I'll probably like place some of the enemies throughout here, but I think I need to set up some sort of script to where they either respawn every so often or they respawn if they're dead and if they go through another trigger box somewhere in the level. Yeah, that's what I got to figure out. Yeah. And really, besides that, and obviously the trigger box to close the door, I also have to set up these levers to where well, basically I have to set up the levers to where they when all three of them are activated, will open up this gate and will stop the enemies from respawning. It won't kill them, but it will stop them from respawning after they're dead. But besides those things, which I think need to wait until, you know, the end of the level. Well, basically the end of like this like me creating this section. We're pretty much done cluttering with this section, which is good. Which means we can move on to cluttering this section, which at first glance is like, oh boy, that's a lot of stuff to clutter. Yes, but we also don't need to clutter a whole lot of it. There's going to be like Draugr, and some of these rooms are going to have, I think I'm going to put werebears in there. Yeah, besides that, besides putting like the enemies in, and these enemies won't respawn, but besides putting those enemies in, I pretty much just have to associate these levers with the gates that will be closed. Put some treasure and some certain alcoves and whatnot. After doing that, like this section's pretty easy, actually. There'll be like a table here and, torches set throughout the place and whatnot. But again, besides that, this should be a pretty easy section to clutter. This section is pretty much already cluttered. Well, yeah, it's pretty much cluttered already. I think I want to put, maybe another campfire over here with some dead bodies. I don't know. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not a campfire, but maybe a bunch of dead bodies. And I don't know, maybe like a chest over here or something. I don't know. But yeah, there's some really small minor things with this section that can be added. But like I said, otherwise this section's like pretty much already cluttered because there's not much else to it. And I got to figure out a way to script in to where once the player has the totem of claw and the totem of fang from the two enemies in this area, they'll place them here and that will open the gate, and then they'll be able to go to the last section, the last level. So not much else left. Gotta clutter this last section. Well, okay, we'll clutter the third section. We'll kind of add the finishing touches of cluttering to this section. Then we'll start adding in our scripts and triggers and stuff like that. But yeah, I like it. All right. So I'm done for the night. I'm going to go relax. I will be back on Wednesday. I'm kind of going back to my old schedule. We're doing Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and a weekend day. Probably Sunday this weekend. Because, yes, I want to continue working on this more, but first of all, I have my brother's housewarming party to go to on Saturday, and we also have a lot of unpacking still to do, the apartment. So we'll probably do some of that tomorrow. But we also want to do some time with that on Sunday. And once we're done with that, we'll be settled in. But yeah, you'll see me back here on Wednesday and then Thursday, and then probably at least for a little bit on Sunday. And then we're going to keep going. We're going to continue this, and we're looking to be done by September 1st. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me here today, and I'll see y'all later.